We are living through some very interesting and dangerous times. And I think that is cliche. I think I've been using those expressions for some time, or that expression that we are indeed going through some dangerous moments of our lives. And those of you who are not waking up to see that we are not living in normal times, I am not sure what you're seeing, or it means therefore that you are not thinking. But certainly the times in which we live is um, or dangerous, and we need to take stock in terms of where we are going from here. Now, I just finished listening to a program, a podcast that was published by Al Jazeera, and the title of the podcast was "Democracy Doesn't Exist in the United States." And Chris Hedges was the guest, and he was being interviewed, and he was quite honest. Now, I don't always believe, or agree with everything that Chris Hedges say, or says rather, but you have to agree with him in terms that the United States is not a democracy. Democracy does not exist in the United States. In fact, if you read the book, and I have it right here before me, I wonder if I can, Black Reconstruction, I think that's the title of the book that was written by W. Du Bois, you will understand that he traced the history of the United States in terms of labor movements, because instead of giving the history of slavery as just, the war between the North and the South, he actually looked at labor. And I think that W. Du Bois is one of the greatest, if not the finest, intellectuals that America has ever produced. And he wrote and he looked at the friction, the tension between the economic and social classes in the United States. Oftentimes we look at race, but the class issue, at the time when I read him, because W. Du Bois, he actually cemented his thesis in the sort of communist ideology and rhetoric. And, sometimes we tend to dismiss people because we don't agree with a particular theory that they might be talking about. But we have to look at the facts that they're presenting, not necessarily their analyses in terms of what is truth. But we must look at the facts and look at the evidence that they present to us for us to have an intelligent discourse. Many of us, we deny things, and because even when we haven't read it, even when we have not interacted with the evidence presented therein. Now, W. Du Bois mentioned the fact that the slaves would have been the working class, and also the whites, the Irish and the Italians and the Germans who were living in the United States at the time, before and after the Civil War. And he presented that fact very, very compellingly, and in which he presented that blacks, even though they were slaves before the Civil War, that they had the same interests, because the white people, the Irish and the Germans, and among other white ethnic groups in the United States, were not being paid well. We must remember that for years, the United States did not pay their laborers well, right? They would work in factories, but they were not paid, a salary or a wage on which they could survive, or they could survive very well. So it was during the after what's his name, FDR came into power, that we had the emerging middle class in the United States, the widest on a grander scale, right? In which, FDR was forced by the then left, to, increase and to share the wealth of the oligarchy with the people, the corporatists, with the American people. And that is how we have the middle class. But after the Vietnam War, during the Cold War and the Vietnam War, which costed America lots of money, among other wars like the war with North Korea, the Korean War, right? And also other wars that the United States was waging during the Cold War, we understand that it weakened the United States tremendously. Economically, the United States was about to default on its debt because of how it was on a war rampage. Now, what we have to understand that in the 1970s, when the gold standard was removed and the United States dollar was just, a floating currency, the United States took on a very imperial attitude toward the world, and it imposed its dollar on the world as the the currency that ought to be used and that people ought to pay their debt in. And that is why you had all of this debt, accruing and building particularly in developing countries during the 70s and onwards to present, because the United States continues to wield power over these countries with its dollar. So those of you who are living in the United States, those people who are in the United States, we must understand that the wealth that people enjoy in the United States is a big result of the free lunch that the third world really has given U.S. citizens through these austere programs, the austerity that the IMF institution, that the IMF and the World Bank have imposed on these countries. So while these countries are impoverished, then the money is transferred to the US oligarchy. And of course, the citizens there, they get some of the crumbs and they feel good about it, and even though they're slaves too. But what we have to understand is that if we don't change the system, it's a system, it's not the president. So I say this to say that Trump is not somebody that is a phenomenon, a new phenomenon. He is the same as a Kamala Harris or as a Joe Biden. The problem is that when these people are in power, particularly for minorities and for people who are so tethered to their own ignorance, right? They tend not to, the media, for example, protect these people from the corruption and what they're doing. For example, we had 1 million people who died in the Ukraine. Was that mentioned in the news? Oh, 1 million people or a lot have died in the Ukraine. And Americans, for the most part, particularly those who voted for the Democratic Party, did not even bat an eye. To them, it's normal, right? The thousands of people who also died in the Gaza area. And these wars could have been avoided. They could have been averted. But Joe Biden, particularly because he was demented, he thought that, that would have given Americans something that the US is actually, showing its muscles, right, to the world, its muscular foreign policy to the world, that they are in charge. But we must understand that what goes around comes around. Now, there's an article that was written here. For those of you who think that we have a right and we have a left, you need to go and read, all right? And you need to go and get your act together and wake up and stop thinking that the US is this great democracy that you think it is. Wow, I thought I had it on the screen. But the fact of the matter is, let me see if I can put it up here now. It says here, Trump's real base is the ruling class, right? That is what the article was entitled. And it was actually posted on the truthdig.com website. And it says that don't blame the Trump presidency on the white proletariat. The real responsibility for this epically transgressive administration, headed by an individual Noam Chomsky rightly describes as the most dangerous criminal in human history, lies with the billionaire class. And he's not the most criminal. That is a lie that is told by Noam Chomsky, who sometimes is not actually fair and balanced in his criticism. He tethers himself to the so-called left, and which is really right in the United States, because there's no, left-wing party in the United States. There are two right-winged parties, and that's what we have to understand. According to a mainstream media myth, long believed by intellectuals who ought to know better, right, including the Noam Chomskys, Donald Trump rode into the White House on a great upsurge of support from poor, white, working-class voters drawn to the Republican candidate's populist anti-Wall Street pitch in key deindustrialized battleground states. Now, so that's how people say that he is one. But he's suggesting here in this article that that's not true, right? That is not true, because according to the sources cited in Slate's analysis, the declining numbers of working class Democratic voters between 2012 and 2016 was much bigger than the increase of working class Republican voters in the Rust Belt 5. Among those earning less than $50,000 a year in those states, the drop in Democratic voting was 3.5 times greater than the uptick in Republican voting. The party's long tilt to the corporatist and Wall Street-friendly right, evident under Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, explains in part why 45% of the US electorate didn't bother to vote in 2016. Trump was elected by just a little more than a quarter of the US voting age population. So what is interesting is that Trump is defending the interest of the ruling class, of the US ruling class. Now, when I spoke about slavery, I wanted to just let you know that both classes, both the Republican Party then, which Black people supported, and the Democratic Party then, were pro-slavery. The difference is that they had a friction within the ruling class, right? The North did not want to expand slavery because they realized that the South had a tremendous power over them. They were wealthier, the ruling class in the South, even though the South was poorer in terms of its infrastructural development, and the North was more industrialized. It was built on industries. The South wanted to expand on slavery. They wanted to have slavery in other parts of the United States, the new soil, on the new soil that was founded, like, places like California and other in the Midwest of the United States. And North was saying no, because if we continue expanding slavery, then you're going to have slavery throughout the United States. And, Abraham Lincoln and his party, the Republican Party, did not want to have that. But it's not that they were. Abraham Lincoln initially was pro-slavery, and he did not mind slavery being in the South. What he was suggesting, what he was insisting on, is that slavery should not have been expanded. So in other words, the war was not fought over slavery per se. It was fought over the expansion of slavery. It was fought over slavery for Black people, because Black people never wanted it in the South, nor anywhere, right? Because who would want slavery? But in the eyes of the ruling elites, even though they were pro-slavery, but it did mean that they were pro-Blacks and they were pro-labor. They were neither pro-Blacks nor pro-labor. That is what you have to understand. So they fought. But the war was not about slavery in their eyes, even though the slaves made it their wars. In the same way, we have to make this war, because it is a war. The ruling class or the ruling classes are against the average Joe, the common man. And we have to, I'm not suggesting that we should have a revolution, even though that might be in the making, the works, because when you have these tensions built, there's no other way. Right? There's no other way, because people are going to fight to maintain and to secure their economic freedom, unless we've lost our soul. And maybe we have just lost our souls because of this technology and what we're on phones constantly, and many of what we're seeing on YouTube and other are not the truth. They're just, giving you some short clippage, some short clips, I should say, of what is happening. They're not actually telling you exactly what is really happening in society. But I have to end here. I would love to have expanded on my ideas about slavery, but we must begin to understand right now that the ruling class does not mean the average Joe well, and that Trump, Biden, Harris, they are a part of the same team, even though just like the North and the South, they might just have a different style in terms of how they impose authoritarianism on the American population. Okay, thank you so much for joining, and please like, share, and subscribe.